My sister and I inherited Mum's house 50-50. She moved in, refused to sell, and made me pay half the bills for 6 years. The estate agent's board went up on a Tuesday, and my sister rang me within the hour, and she was crying, and she said, "How could you do this to me, Delphine? This is my home. This is where I live. And you want to sell it out from under me so you can have your money? Mum would be ashamed of you. She's not even cold, and you're putting up a for sale sign on the house I live in." Our mother had been dead for 6 years. I had by that point paid something in the region of £19,000 toward a house I had not set foot in for 4 of those years, that my sister lived in rent-free, that I owned half of, and that she had refused, for 6 years, to sell. Let me buy her out of, or to buy me out of. And when I finally forced the sale through the only door available to me, she rang me sobbing that I was throwing her out of her home, half of which was mine, which I paid to insure and repair, and could not enter. Let me back up. My name is Delphine Ape. I'm 53 years old, and I want to tell you about the 6 years I spent as the co-owner of a house I was locked out of, because it taught me something about property that nobody tells you, and that cost me 6 years and a sister to learn. Owning half of something and being able to use half of something are completely different, and the person who is physically inside a house has almost all the power, no matter whose name is on the title. My mother left her house to my sister and me equally, 50-50. Could not have been fairer, and she did it precisely because it was fair. She wanted no favoritism, no complication, just her 2 daughters sharing her life's one asset equally. And that equal, fair, loving arrangement became the mechanism by which my sister took the whole thing, for 6 years, for nothing. Because equal ownership turns out to mean almost nothing when one owner moves in and the other doesn't. One inside can refuse to leave, refuse to sell, refuse to pay, and refuse to buy you out, all at once. And the law, as I would slowly and expensively discover, does not simply come and fix that for you. Possession is not 9/10 of the law. But it is a great deal more than half, and I did not know that, and my sister, I am now certain, knew it from the first week. Let me tell you about my mother and the house, because the house is the whole story, as it always is. My mother, Grace, came to this country in 1968 and cleaned offices for 11 years, and then trained as a nurse. And in 1985, she and my father bought a 3-bedroom terrace in South London for £31,000. My father died in 2001. My mother stayed in that house. Loan for another 17 years, and it was the fixed point of our family. The place everyone came back to, the place Christmas, happened the place my mother touched the door frame of when she came in. Which I have since learned is a thing a great many immigrant parents do with the house that proved it was all worth it. There were 2 of us. My sister Bernadette, 3 years younger, and me, and our relationship before the house was ordinary, not close, not distant. We were different. I'd trained as an accountant and lived a careful, ordered life. Bernadette had had a more turbulent time of it, a couple of difficult relationships, some money trouble, a period I won't detail. At the time our mother was dying, Bernadette was 50 and living in a rented flat, and I would say not in a settled place in her life. Our mother died in 2018 of a stroke, quite suddenly. And her will was simple, and I have read it perhaps 100 times since. It left her entire estate, which was essentially just the house, by then worth about £410,000, to her 2 daughters in equal shares. Equal shares. 2 words that I thought at the time closed off every possible problem. Here is how it began, and I want to be precise, because the beginning was entirely reasonable, and that is exactly why it worked. In the weeks after the funeral, there was the question of the house. And Bernadette was in a bad way, grief on top of an already unstable situation, and she was in that rented flat, and her tenancy, as it happened, was ending. And she asked if she could move into Mum's house, just for a while. Just while the estate was sorted out and she got herself back on her feet and we worked out what to do with the place. And I said yes. Of course I said yes. What kind of person says no to that? My sister was grieving and about to be between homes, and here was our mother's house sitting empty, and it made perfect sense for her to be in it while we decide things. Better than it sitting empty, better than paying to secure an empty property. It was the obvious, humane, sensible answer. I want to stop on that, because it is the single most important moment in 6 years, and it took about 90 seconds and felt like nothing. When I said, yes, of course, move in while we sort things out, I thought I was doing my sister a kindness during a hard time. What I was actually doing, though neither the word nor the concept was in my head, was giving one co-owner exclusive possession of a jointly owned asset with no agreement about rent, no agreement about duration. No agreement about what sorting things out meant or when it would happen. I handed her the house. I just thought I was lending it to her. I have gone over that 90 seconds more than any other in my life, and I want to say what I would say to anyone standing where I stood, because the trap is baited with your own decency, and there is a way to be kind without walking into it. Mistake was not letting her move in. Letting a grieving, soon-to-be homeless sister live in a jointly owned empty house is a good and human thing to do, and I would do it again. The mistake was letting her move in with nothing agreed, no end date, no rent, no written understanding of what while we sort things out meant. If I had said on that day, of course move in. Let's just put something simple in writing. You'll live here rent-free while probate goes through. We'll both aim to have the house on the market within a year, and if you're still there after that, we'll agree a proper arrangement. None of the 6 years happens. Not because the document would have forced her out, but because it would have fixed the meaning of the arrangement at the start, in writing, before the framing could drift. There would have been a thing to point to. Temporary would have had a definition. Instead, I gave her an open-ended, undefined, undocumented occupation, out of love, at a moment when insisting on definitions felt cruel. And that undefined space, The gap where the agreement should have been was the entire territory in which she then operated for 6 years. She didn't break an agreement. There was no agreement to break. She simply occupied the vagueness. That is the specific lesson. When you do someone a kindness with a shared asset, the kindness and the terms are not in competition. You can be completely generous and still write down what the generosity is. The refusal to write it down does not make you kinder. It just makes you undefended. I handed her the house. I just thought I was lending it to her. Let me tell you about the drift, because the drift is the weapon, and it is made entirely of reasonable-sounding delays, exactly like every one of these stories. The estate took a while to administer, probate, the usual. That was year 1, and during year 1 it would obviously have been absurd to discuss selling, because we were still getting the grant. Reasonable. In year 2, I raised it gently, and Bernadette was still, she said, not back on her feet. She'd had a health scare. She asked for a bit more time to get sorted, and said that selling right then, with everything she was dealing with, would tip her over. And I could not, in year 2, be the sister who forced a house sale on a woman recovering from a health scare. Reasonable. In year 3, I raised it more firmly, and something had shifted, though I couldn't yet name it. Bernadette had stopped talking about when we sell and started talking about the house as a settled fact of her life. She'd redecorate a room. She got a cat. And when I raised selling, she was hurt, genuinely, tearfully hurt, that I would even bring it up when she'd finally found some stability after the hardest years of her life. Do you see what had happened? The temporary arrangement had, through nothing but the passage of time and my own reluctance to be cruel, become her home. And you cannot sell someone's home. The framing had done its work. It was no longer the house we're deciding what to do with. It was the house Bernadette lives in, and every conversation about selling was now a conversation about making my sister homeless. Let me give you the specific texture of those years, because she refused to sell makes it sound like a single event, and it was 6 years of 10,000 small moments. There was the way I stopped being able to visit. In year 1 I still went round, it was still in my head, Mum's house, and I'd drop in. But Bernadette began subtly to make it hers. She'd say, "You should have called first." She rearranged the furniture, then redecorated. Then, in year 2, changed the locks for security, and somehow never got round to giving me a key, and I somehow never quite forced the issue, because forcing the issue over a key to my mother's house felt petty, and so without a single confrontation. I became a person who could not enter a house I owned half of. There was my mother's things. All of it was in that house, her photographs, her furniture, the small objects of a life, and they became, by simple physics, Bernadette's because they were where Bernadette lived. When I asked in year 3 for some of Mum's photographs, Bernadette said of course, and then it never happened, and asking again felt like I was making it about objects, and so my mother's entire physical legacy stayed in a house I couldn't get into. In the custody of the sister who'd taken it, and there was the slow rewriting of what the house was. In the first year, Bernadette called it Mum's house. By year 2, it was the house. By year 3, it was my house. I heard her say it to a neighbor, "Come into my house." And by year 4, she referred to me to a cousin as my sister who half owns my house. As though I were a slightly awkward feature of her property, rather than an equal owner of an asset she happened to occupy. Language did the theft before the law ever got involved. By the time I went to solicitor, everyone in my family, including at times me, had absorbed the idea that it was fundamentally Bernadette's home that I had a financial interest in, rather than a jointly owned house that Bernadette was living in for free. And underneath all of it, the whole time I was paying. Let me explain the money, because this is the part that still makes me breathe strangely. We owned the house jointly, which meant we were jointly responsible for it. Buildings insurance was in both our names, and I paid half, because if I didn't, the house we both owned would be uninsured, and I am an accountant and could not allow a £400,000 asset I half owned to be uninsured. When the roof needed work in year 2, £4,000, I paid half, because a co-owner has to maintain the asset, and Bernadette said she couldn't afford her half, and if I didn't pay it, the roof would leak into a house I owned half of. And the boiler went in year 4, same thing. When there was a problem with subsidence and we needed a survey, same thing. The service charge equivalent, the periodic repairs, the insurance year after year, I paid half of all of it for 6 years on a house I could not enter, in which my sister lived for free. That's the detail people cannot believe when I tell them. I was not merely locked out of my inheritance. I was subsidizing the person who locked me out. Every year I paid to keep a roof over my sister's head, a roof I owned half of and slept under 0 nights of, and every year she paid nothing and lived there, and every year the house went up in value. And half of that rising value was hers to enjoy and hers to refuse to release. I calculated it once, in year 5, in the way accountants do when they cannot sleep. Between the insurance, the repairs, and my half of the maintenance, I had put in about £19,000. And she had had, rent-free, the use of a house that would have let for perhaps $1,600 a month. Call it £110,000 of occupation over 6 years, half of which, in fairness, was her own. The true figure, the honest figure, was this. I had paid £19,000 for the privilege of giving my sister roughly £55,000 worth of free housing. And I want to describe what paying it felt like, month after month, because the psychology of it is the part I find hardest to explain to people who haven't been in it. Every payment was individually rational and collectively insane. When the insurance renewal came, of course I paid my half, because the alternative was letting a £400,000 asset I owned half of go uninsured, which no sane person does. When the roof needed fixing, of course I paid my half, because the alternative was letting my own half a house rot. Each single decision, taken alone, was obviously correct, But the sum of those correct decisions was that I was voluntarily funding my own exclusion. Every rational payment deepened the irrational situation. And I could see that. I'm an accountant. I could see it with perfect clarity. And I still made each payment, because refusing any individual one would have damaged the asset, and I could not bring myself to damage the asset to make a point. That is how you end up somewhere insane, by a series of sane steps. My sister understood this about me. She understood that I would always at each decision point do the responsible thing. And that a person who always does the responsible thing at each decision point can be led decision by responsible decision into subsidizing the person exploiting her for years without ever once making a choice she could point to as the mistake. There was no mistake. That was the horror of it. There was just a long chain of correct small choices that added up to a catastrophe, and I made every link in it myself. I used to sit with the renewal notice. I have a specific memory of the building's insurance renewal in year 4, 300 and something pounds, my half, and think, if I don't pay this, I'm being reckless with my own asset. And if I do pay this, I'm funding the woman who's locked me out, and there is no third option, and then I'd pay it. Every time I'd pay it. By year 4, I had stopped being gentle. I asked her to sell. She refused. She wasn't going to be forced out of Mum's house. I asked her to buy me out. She couldn't. She had no money and couldn't get a mortgage. I offered to buy her out, to take on the whole house myself, pay her for her half, and let her go and rent somewhere with 200,000 pounds in her pocket, which is not a bad outcome for anybody. She refused that too. And when I pushed on why won't you take 200,000 pounds and your freedom, she said the thing that finally told me what I was dealing with. She said, because it's my home, Delphine. You can't put a price on a home. I don't want money. I want to live in Mum's house. She wanted the house for free forever, and she wanted me to keep paying half the cost of it, and she had constructed, genuinely. I think she believed it, a moral framework in which any attempt by me to realize the value of my own half was an act of violence against her. And here's the part that made it unbearable. The family agreed with her. Because when the family looked at the situation, they did not see a woman being locked out of her inheritance and forced to subsidize the person locking her out. They saw one sister, comfortable, an accountant with her own home, and another sister who'd had a hard life, finally settled and stable in their late mother's house. And they saw the comfortable one trying to sell the house out from under the vulnerable one. Where's she supposed to go, Delphine? That was the refrain. My aunt said it. My cousin said it. You've got your own house. She's only got Mum's. Where's she supposed to go? As though the answer, she's supposed to go and rent a flat with the 200,000 pounds that is her half of the house, was unspeakable. As though my sister were entitled not just to her half, but to mine indefinitely because she needed it more. I want to sit with the where's she supposed to go argument because it is the emotional engine of the whole thing and it is worth taking apart since it very nearly worked on me too. The argument has genuine force. My sister had had a hard life. I had had an easier one. I'd been careful and lucky, and I had my own home. There was a real asymmetry of need, and I am not going to pretend there wasn't, and the family was not wrong to see it. But watch what the argument actually does. It takes a real difference in circumstances and uses it to justify an indefinite transfer of my property to my sister, because her half of the house was never in dispute. Nobody was trying to take Bernadette's half. Her half, 200,000 pounds, was hers, guaranteed, the moment the house sold. Where's she supposed to go with 200,000 pounds in her pocket has an obvious answer. Anywhere she likes, in a rented flat, more securely housed than most people in this country. The only thing selling the house would have taken from Bernadette was the free use of my half, and the family's argument, where she's supposed to go, quietly treated my half as hers by right of need. Smuggled in the premise that because she needed housing, and I didn't, my share of my mother's estate was morally hers to occupy for as long as she wanted. And I could never say that out loud without sounding monstrous. Because I want my sister to have only her own 200,000 pounds, and not also the free use of my 200,000 pounds, is completely reasonable and completely correct, and sounds when a grieving sister is crying across a table. Like the coldest sentence a human being ever uttered. The need was real, but need is not a title deed. My sister needed housing, she did not need my housing, and the whole family had been quietly persuaded that those were the same thing. In year 4, I organized a family meeting, because I thought if I laid out the actual facts, the money, the years, the refusals, people would see it. It was at my aunt's. And I brought, God help me, a spreadsheet. I have learned since that bringing a spreadsheet to a family emotional dispute is the single most reliably self-defeating act available to a human being. But I did not know that then, and I am an accountant, and a spreadsheet is how I think. I laid out the 6 years. The 19,000 I'd paid, the rent-free occupation, the 3 refusals. I was calm and the numbers were correct and I thought they were unanswerable. And Bernadette did not answer them. She did something far more effective. She cried and she said, "You brought a spreadsheet. To talk about Mum's house? You've put our mother's home on a spreadsheet and worked out what I owe you for grieving in it." And the room turned completely in an instant, because she was right about the optics. I was the woman with the calculator. She was the woman crying about her mother's house. There is no contest between those two images, and I had handed her the contrast myself. And then my aunt said the thing that ended the meeting. "Delphine, it's a house, it's bricks. Bernadette is your sister. Is a pile of bricks worth more to you than your own sister? Because that's what this looks like. It looks like you love money more than you love Bernie. Is a pile of bricks worth more than your sister?" And I could not answer it in that room. Because any true answer, it's not bricks, it's 200,000 pounds that is legally mine, and that I am being denied while I paid a house the person denying it, sounded exactly like a woman confirming that yes, she loved money more than her sister. I left having achieved the precise opposite of what I intended. The story became, Delphine brought a spreadsheet and tried to evict Bernie at a family meeting. That's what circulated. My own careful, accurate 6-year record of being wronged became evidence that I was cold, calculating, and heartless. I didn't try again for over a year. Eventually, I saw a solicitor, and I went in certain that I would be told I could simply force this, because I was a joint owner and joint owners have rights. And the solicitor, a careful woman called Priya Anand, gave me an afternoon that rearranged my understanding of what ownership even means. She said, I need to explain your position, and it's more complicated than you think. You own half the house. That's clear from the title. But ownership of a share does not give you a right to physically occupy against the other owner, and it does not automatically entitle you to rent from an occupying co-owner. 2 joint owners each have a right to occupy the whole property. That's what joint ownership means. Your sister living there is not, in itself, unlawful. She's a co-owner in occupation. You are also entitled to occupy, but you can't in practice because you can't force your way into a house where your sister lives, and no court is going to order 2 estranged sisters to cohabit. I said, so she can just live there, for free, forever. And I can't do anything, and Priya said, that's what she's relying on, and up to a point she's right. You cannot simply take possession, you cannot simply demand rent, and you cannot simply sell, because a sale of jointly owned property normally needs both owners to agree, and she won't. That was the false victory in reverse. The moment I understood that everything I'd assumed about my rights as a half-owner was, in the practical sense, close to worthless. I had walked into that office to be handed a sword and been shown, instead, exactly how little a half-share is worth when the other half is inside the house and unwilling. Priya was patient about it, because she'd clearly had this conversation many times. She said most people arrive believing that I own half is a trump card, and that the hardest part of her job is explaining that co-ownership is a shared right, not a divided one. You don't own the left half of the house and your sister the right half, she said. You each own an undivided share of the whole, which means you each have a right to the whole. And when 2 people have an equal right to occupy the whole of one house and can't stand each other, the practical result is that whoever is already inside stays inside. The law abhors making people cohabit, so it mostly leaves possession where it finds it. And possession, in your case, is your sister. She was describing, in calm legal language, exactly the thing my sister had understood intuitively and expressed as possession is everything. My sister and my solicitor agreed completely about the law. The difference was that my sister had known it for 6 years and used it, and I was learning it, for the first time, at 53, having already paid £19,000. And I asked the question everyone asks, which was, then what is the point of owning half if the other person can just live in it? And Priya said the thing that reframed everything. The point of owning half is not that you can occupy it. The point is that you can force it to be sold and take your half of the money. Your ownership isn't a right to the house, it's a right to the value. And that right, unlike possession, is one no co-owner can defeat by simply staying put. I had spent 6 years believing that at some point the law would obviously back me, because I owned half. And I was being told that owning half, against a sibling who lives in the property and won't cooperate, is one of the weaker positions in English property law, not one of the stronger ones. And then Priya said, but, and the but is the whole third act. She said, there's a statute. The Trusts of Land and Appointment of Trustees Act, everyone calls it TOLATA. When co-owners can't agree what to do with a jointly owned property, either owner can apply to the court, and the court has the power to order a sale. Your sister's refusal is not the end of the matter. It only works as long as you don't go to court. You can go to court, and the court can override her and order the house sold and the proceeds split. And there's a second thing, and it matters even more to you because you've been paying. When one co-owner has had exclusive occupation and has effectively excluded the other, the court can order an occupation rent, a credit to the excluded owner, to account for the fact that one of you had sole use of an asset you both own. And your payments toward insurance and repairs can be brought into the account too. It's called an account of occupation rent and equitable accounting, and on your facts, 6 years of exclusion, 6 years of you paying half the costs, it is a strong claim. I sat there while my entire understanding reversed itself. For 6 years, I had believed I was powerless because I only owned half and she was inside. And it turned out that the thing I actually needed had existed the whole time, in a statute from 1996, and that my sister's entire 6-year strategy, refuse everything and stay put, worked only for exactly as long as I failed to walk into a solicitor's office. Possession is powerful, but it is powerful against inertia. It is not powerful against a court order for sale. My sister had built her castle on my reluctance to fight, and the moment I stopped being reluctant, the castle had no foundation at all. I want to describe how I felt walking out of that solicitor's office, because it was not simple relief. It was relief mixed with a specific kind of grief that I think is worth naming. The relief was enormous. For 6 years, I had believed I was trapped, that the situation was a genuine deadlock with no key, that a co-owner in possession simply held all the cards, and there was nothing to be done but wait or capitulate. And I had just been told that a remedy had existed the entire time, straightforward and well-established, and that I could end the whole thing. But underneath the relief was something much worse, which was the understanding of how much the 6 years had cost me unnecessarily. Because the remedy hadn't appeared. It hadn't been created by some change in the law. It had been sitting in a statute since 1996, since before my mother even died. Every single day of those 6 years, I could have walked into an office and been told what I was now being told. The £19,000, the exclusion, the family turning against me, the erosion of myself, all of it had happened not because I was powerless, but because I did not know I had power and had never asked. That is a very hard thing to sit with. It is one thing to be trapped. It is another to discover that you were never trapped, that the door had been unlocked the whole time, and that you had spent 6 years leaning against it, weeping, because it had never occurred to you to try the handle. I did not blame my sister for that part. My sister exploited a gap, that's what she did, and I've made my peace with what she is. But the gap was my ignorance, and the ignorance was mine. And I have thought a great deal since about how many people are sitting in exactly that gap right now, technically powerful, practically bleeding, convinced they have no options simply because nobody has told them the name of the statute. Possession is powerful, but it is powerful against inertia. It is not powerful against a court order for sale. My sister had built her castle on my reluctance to fight, and the moment I stopped being reluctant, the castle had no foundation at all. ACT3, the plan, in her own words. I would have won the TOLATA claim on the bare facts. But two things turned it from a win into a rout, and both of them proved something I had suspected for years and could never establish. That the temporary, just while I get sorted, framing had been a deliberate strategy from the very beginning. The first was a WhatsApp message, and I got it by accident, the way these things always surface. My cousin Ngozi, Burnett's confidant for years, and mine when it suited, forwarded me the wrong screenshot. She meant to send me something else, a photo, and instead sent a fragment of a conversation she'd had with Bernadette back in the second year that she'd been scrolling through. And in it, Bernadette had written about me, about the house. Just let Delphine keep paying and don't mention selling. Possession is everything. If I'm living there, she can't just chuck me out. It costs a fortune to force it, and she won't. She hates conflict. Play the mum card. She'll pay for years before she does anything about it. Possession is everything. Play the mum card. In the second year. Written by my sister to my cousin, laying out the entire strategy that she would stay, refuse to discuss selling, weaponize our mother's memory, and rely specifically on my dislike of conflict and my willingness to keep paying. Every single thing that had happened to me for 6 years, my sister had described in advance, in a text, in year 2, as a plan. I want to describe what receiving that screenshot did to me, because it was not the vindication you might imagine, or at least not only that. The first thing I felt was a strange, cold calm. For 6 years, I had been fighting a fog. Everyone kept telling me it was all just a sad situation, that Bernadette wasn't scheming, that she was a vulnerable woman who'd found some stability, and I was reading malice into grief. And some part of me had believed them, because the alternative, that my own sister was running a deliberate, cynical strategy against me and performing grief to sell it, was almost too ugly to hold. And then there it was, in her own words, in the second year. Possession is everything. Play the mum card. She'll pay for years before she does anything about it. Not sad, not vulnerable, strategic, cold, accurate. She had looked at me, assessed my psychology correctly, my conflict version, my sense of responsibility, my reluctance to be cruel, and built a 6-year plan around exploiting exactly those traits, and then coached herself to perform grief to keep it running. The calm came from the fog lifting. I was not mad. I had not been imagining it. Every instinct I doubted for 6 years was correct, and I had documentary proof in her handwriting that it was correct. And the second thing I felt, underneath the calm, was a grief that is never entirely gone. Because play the mum card is a sentence about our mother. My sister had taken the one thing that was purely sacred to both of us, our mother, her house, her memory, the door frame she touched when she came in, and identified it in a text message as a tactical asset, a card to play. She had weaponized our dead mother against me and written it down as strategy. That's the thing I can't get past, even now, even with everything resolved. Not that she took the money, that she looked at the memory of the woman who raised us both and saw a card. The second was the emails from the beginning. Because I went back, properly back, through my own inbox to the first weeks after the funeral, and I found the exchange where she'd asked to move in. And her own words at the time were, just while probate goes through and we decide what to do with it, I'll be looking for my own place in the new year. I'll be looking for my own place in the new year. In her own writing at the outset, the arrangement was explicitly temporary, through probate, until we decide, with her looking for her own place within months. That email, which I'd forgotten existed, established that the temporary framing was not my misunderstanding. It was the agreed basis on which she entered. She had said it herself, and then she had simply never left and rewritten the history so that it had always been her home. But those two documents side by side, the 2018 email promising to leave in the new year, and the year 2 text saying, just let Delphine keep paying, possession is everything, and you have the whole thing. Temporary arrangement, entered on a written promise to leave, converted by deliberate strategy into a permanent free occupation, with the costs loaded onto the excluded owner. We did not get to a final hearing. TOLATA claims usually settle once the occupying party gets proper advice, because the outcome is not really in doubt. The court's power to order a sale is well established, and a co-owner cannot hold a property hostage indefinitely. But there was a moment in the solicitor-led negotiation that I will keep. Bernadette's position, right up until the disclosure, was the one she'd held for 6 years. This is my home, it would be cruel to sell it, and Delphine can afford to wait. And then my solicitor's letter set out the claim, the order for sale, and the account for occupation rent, and the repairs I'd funded, which together meant that not only would the house be sold, but that Bernadette's half of the proceeds would be reduced by years of occupation rent and by my repayments potentially very substantially. And attached to it, referenced carefully, were her own words, the email, and the text. The reply came back changed. The tone was completely different. Suddenly, Bernadette was willing to discuss a sale in an orderly way. Suddenly, there was concern about the occupation rent figure. Suddenly, the woman who could not possibly leave her mother's home was negotiating her exit terms. because the occupation rent was the thing that broke it. As long as staying put was free, she could stay forever. The moment staying put meant her share of the house was being eaten away, month, by rent she owed me for excluding me, the entire logic of her position collapsed. Possession stopped being a fortress and became a liability. Every extra month she refused to sell now cost her. There was a specific moment in the negotiation that I want to record, because it is the moment the 6 years reversed. My solicitor put a figure on the occupation rent, a running total of what Bernadette owed me for having excluded me from a house I owned half of, calculated over the full period, at a fair market proportion. And she set it beside the repairs and insurance I'd carried. And the combined figure was large enough that it materially reduced Bernadette's share of the sale proceeds. And I watched, through the correspondence, my sister's entire framework collapse. Not morally, she never conceded a thing morally, but practically. Because for 6 years her strategy had rested on a single unspoken assumption. That time was on her side. Every month she delayed, she gained a month of free housing, and I gained nothing, and so she could delay forever and only I would suffer for it. The occupation rent inverted that completely. Suddenly every month she delayed cost her, because the longer the exclusion ran, the larger the rent she owed me, the more her share shrank. Time had switched sides. The weapon she'd wielded for 6 years, I can just wait. She can't make me move. Waiting is free became the thing working against her, because waiting was no longer free. It had a meter on it now, and the meter ran in my favor. That is the moment a person like my sister folds. Not when you appeal to her conscience. She didn't have one available on this subject. Not when you cry, or when the family pleads. She folded the instant that staying became more expensive than leaving. 6 years of you can't make me ended the week that not going started costing her money. The house sold. My aunt, I'm told, was very upset about it, right up until she wasn't. The house sold for £440,000. After the sale, the accounting was done. I received my half, plus a negotiated sum for occupation rent, plus reimbursement of the repairs and insurance I'd carried for 6 years. Bernadette received her half, reduced by those same amounts. I want to be clear about the final arithmetic, because it is the whole moral of the thing. For 6 years, Bernadette lived rent-free and I paid, and everyone believed that she was winning and I was the fool. And in the end, the 6 years of winning became a debt. Every rent-free month was reversed and charged back. She left the arrangement with meaningfully less than half, because she had had 6 years of exclusive use that the law made her account for, and I left with meaningfully more than half, because I had funded and been excluded. She had spent 6 years accumulating a liability she thought was a victory. Bernadette and I do not speak. There was no reconciliation, and I do not expect one. Her position, relayed through the family, is that I sold Mum's house and made her homeless, and that no amount of money makes that right. The occupation rent, in her telling, was me charging my own sister to live in our mother's house, which is, I suppose, technically what it was, and which leaves out that she was living in my half of it for free while I paid the bills. My cousin Ngozi and I have talked since about what she calls the accident, the screenshot she sent me by mistake. She was mortified when she realized what she'd done. She had been, at that point, more Bernadette's confidant than mine, and she'd handed me the single most damaging document in the whole affair entirely by fumbling her phone. And she asked me once whether I felt guilty using it, given how I'd come by it. And I thought about that honestly, and I said no, because here's the thing about that text. It didn't create the truth, it revealed it. Everything Bernadette wrote in that message was already true and had already been done to me. Possession is everything. Play the mum card. She'll pay for years. She hadn't confessed to a plan she was about to carry out. She described a plan she'd already spent years executing successfully. The screenshot didn't make her guilty. It made her guilt visible. It took the thing everyone had told me I was imagining and put it in her own words, so that it could no longer be waved away as my paranoia. And that is what these situations turn on, in the end. Not on the truth, which is usually knowable to the person being wronged long before anyone believes her. It turns on whether the truth can be made visible to people who have every emotional incentive not to see it. For 6 years, the truth was completely clear to me and completely invisible to everyone else, because my sister's version was sadder and simpler, and I had no way to make mine solid. One accidental screenshot made it solid. That's all it took, not new facts, just a way to make the old facts undeniable. The family split, roughly, along the lines you'd expect. My aunt has never forgiven me. My cousin Ngozi, who forwarded me the fatal screenshot by accident and then had to live with having done it, is somewhere in between, and I don't hold the awkwards against her. She did me the greatest favor of the whole affair entirely by mistake. I want to say something about the money at the end, because people assume the recovery of it was the happy ending, and it wasn't quite. Yes, I got my half, plus the occupation rent, plus my repairs back. On paper, I won. But the 6 years were not returned to me, and the 6 years were the actual cost. I was 53 by the time it settled. I had been 47 when my mother died. Those were not nothing years. They were the years in which I could have been at peace with my inheritance and my grief. And instead I spent them in a low, grinding conflict that soured my relationship with my whole extended family and cost me a sister. And the occupation rent, though it was legally just and I'd claim it again, is the thing that ensured Bernadette and I will never reconcile. Because to her, and to the part of the family that sides with her, the story is not Delphine recovered her share after 6 years of exclusion. The story is Delphine sold Mum's house and then charged her own homeless sister rent for the years she lived there. Said like that, stripped of everything underneath, it sounds monstrous, and there is no short sentence I can say in reply that fixes it. Because the true reply, she lived in my half for free for 6 years while I paid the bills and refused £200,000 to leave. takes a paragraph, and nobody wants the paragraph. They want the short version, and the short version favors her. That's the last cruelty of these situations. Even when you win, even when the documents are on your side and the law vindicates you completely, the story can still belong to the other person, because their version is shorter and sadder and fits on a Christmas table sentence. I have the money, she has the narrative. I've decided I can live with that trade, but it took me a while, and some days it's closer than others. I bought a small flat with my share, near where I already lived, and I have never for one moment regretted forcing the sale, and I have regretted almost every day the 6 years I waited to do it. Here's the last thing. I have thought for a long time about why I waited 6 years, and the answer is not that I didn't understand the money. I'm an accountant. I understood the money perfectly. I could have told you the exact figure I was losing at any point. Answer is that I did not understand the law, and specifically I did not understand that being reasonable and being right are not the same thing, and that the law will not reward you for being patient. I want to be honest about the years I lost, because the 6 years were not just a delay. They were a slow erosion of me, and I think other people in this position need to hear that it is not only about the money. I became, over those years, smaller. I stopped raising it because raising it always cost me a bad phone call, a cold week, a family member telling me I was being hard. And a person who stops raising the thing that is being done to her over and over for years does not stay the same person. I got quieter. I got more careful. I started to doubt my own read of the situation because everyone around me was telling me gently that I was the one in the wrong. And after enough years of that, some part of you starts to wonder if they're right if you really are just a cold woman who cares about a house more than her sister. There was a period around year 5 when I genuinely could not tell anymore whether I was the victim or the villain. I would lay it all out to myself, the ownership, the payments, the exclusion, the refusals, and it was obvious I was being wronged. And then I'd go to a family gathering and watch my sister be warm and grieved and settled, and watch everyone be tender with her, and I'd come home convinced I was a monster for wanting to disturb it. I was gaslit, though I didn't have the word then, and the most effective part of it was that nobody was lying. They genuinely saw a vulnerable woman in her late mother's house and a comfortable woman trying to sell it. That was a true description of the surface. Just left out everything underneath. And the erosion had a cost beyond the 6 years, because when I finally acted, I acted late, timid, and full of doubt, and I nearly settled several times for far less than I was owed, simply to make the discomfort stop. Waiting didn't just cost me the years. It cost me the confidence to fight properly even once I'd started. I kept waiting because I kept thinking that at some point the situation would resolve itself, that Bernadette would get back on her feet, that she'd see sense, that the family would intervene, that the sheer unfairness of it would eventually become visible to everyone and correct itself. I was waiting for justice to arrive on its own. It doesn't. That's the thing nobody tells you. The law gave me a powerful remedy, a court's power to order the sale of my own house over my sister's objection, to charge her rent for excluding me, and it sat there unused for 6 years, available the entire time, because I did not know it existed, and because using it felt aggressive, and because my sister had correctly calculated that I would rather bleed than fight. Possession is everything. Play the mum card. She'll pay for years before she does anything about it. She was right about all of it. For 6 years, she was completely right. I paid for years. I played along. I let possession be everything. She just didn't know about a statute from 1996, and she didn't know that the day I walked into a solicitor's office, the 6 years of my patience would stop being her fortress and start being her bill. My mother left us that house equally because she wanted us to share it fairly. In the end, we did share it fairly, but only after I stopped being fair and started being right.